Before we advance any further into this transmission, you will leave a like, you will activate your subscription, and you will declare in the comments whether you possess the audacity to stand against the Imperium. Speak truthfully, or face the consequences.
Picture an entire planet raising its voice in defiance and saying one simple word, no. No to the Imperium of Man. No to the God Emperor of mankind himself. It sounds suicidal, and indeed it is. But in the grim darkness of the far future, even this unthinkable act has happened. Worlds sworn to the Emperor's service have, on rare occasions, dared to reject him and his rule. The question is, what comes next? What happens when an entire planet, bred and raised to revere the Emperor as a living god, decides to turn its back and rebel? In a galaxy where loyalty is the only law and heresy the blackest sin, the answer is as brutal as you might imagine. An Imperial world that says no to the Emperor is no longer an Imperial world at all. It becomes a battlefield, a target of wrath, and if it cannot be brought to heel, it becomes an example. The tale of such a world's fate is a cautionary one, full of despair, fire, and a kind of bleak irony. Because the Imperium doesn't just let you walk away, ever. So let's dive into this morbid scenario and peel back every layer of it. From the first treacherous spark of defiance, to the all-consuming war that follows, to the ashes that remain at the end, we'll explore it all. Why would a planet ever make this choice? How does the Imperium respond to such betrayal? And is there ever any chance of victory or even survival for those who choose to defy the God Emperor's will? Brace yourself, this is not a happy story. But then in Warhammer 40,000, happy stories are in short supply. What you're about to witness is the anatomy of a planetary rebellion in the Imperium of Man. It's grim, it's dark, and it might even be a little absurd in its horror. Our journey begins with understanding the why, the spark that lights the heretical flame. Why would anyone, let alone an entire world, reject the Emperor's light? What could drive them to such madness? Why rebel? For a planet to defy the Imperium, something must have pushed it to the brink. By default, Imperial citizens are taught from birth that the Emperor is everything, their god, their protector, the very reason humanity still exists. Saying no to him is saying no to mankind itself, according to Imperial creed. So what could possibly drive an entire world into such rebellion? In truth, there are a few recurring themes, none of them good and all of them desperate in one way or another. One major catalyst is crushing burdens and sheer desperation. Often it starts with the brutal weight of Imperial demands breaking a world's back. Every Imperial planet owes heavy tithes, in manpower, in material, or both. There's a quota of soldiers to raise or to mine, grain to ship or taxes to deliver, and falling short is not really an option. Most planets grit their teeth and give, even when it hurts. But what about when there's nothing left to give? Picture a struggling world that has sent millions of its sons and daughters off to distant wars year after year, until its own factories and farms are short-handed. The fields lie fallow, the planetary defense forces are under strength, all because so many able-bodied workers and soldiers have been tithed away to feed the Imperium's endless wars. Then the next demand comes, say yet another regiment of troops or a double shipment of grain, and finally the planetary governor throws up her hands and says, "No more, we can't." It's technically a refusal, even if it's made out of sheer inability rather than active disloyalty. How do you think the Imperium responds to such a plea? With understanding and leniency? Hardly. There is no line in the Administratum rulebook for "we cannot comply." To the bureaucrats on Terra, "cannot" sounds like "will not," and "will not" is simply treachery. In one recorded case, a governor who begged for relief from troop levies because her planet had been bled dry, fending off repeated Xenos raids, was accused of sedition on the spot. The Imperial envoy essentially told her that duty to the Emperor trumps the planet's survival. Her refusal to send yet more regiments was deemed open rebellion. The end result? The Imperium bombarded her world with far more troops and firepower than it had ever asked from her, forcibly taking what they wanted and then some. The dark irony wasn't lost on anyone. She warned that giving away another chunk of her population would doom the planet, so the Imperium dutifully fulfilled that doom in the Emperor's name. Another cause is plain ambition and pride, the lust for power. Not all rebellions are born of necessity. Some are born of hubris. There are those in the far-flung corners of the galaxy who look at their planet and think, "Why should I bow to distant Terra? I could rule this world outright, not as a caretaker for the Imperium, but as an independent king." Perhaps it starts with a planetary governor who grows tired of being ordered about by remote officials. Maybe a council of powerful nobles or a military junta decides they'd rather chart their own destiny. They might convince themselves they can stand alone. After all, they have a standing army, the Planetary Defense Force, defenses, maybe a stockpile of ancient weapons, maybe even a few void ships. If they're particularly bold, they might attempt to bring a few neighboring worlds into their scheme, dreaming of founding a mini-empire separate from the Imperium. Throughout history, there have been renegade generals, corrupt admirals, and even the odd space marine chapter master who tried to break away and claim territory for themselves. The motives vary: personal power, ideological vision, or simply arrogance. But the act is the same: declaring independence from the Imperium. They might formally renounce the authority of the High Lords of Terra, or quietly stop answering astropathic messages and paying tithes, hoping no one notices. It's the classic "we're on our own now" move. Raise a new flag, maybe crown yourself emperor of your little domain, and thumb your nose at the Golden Throne. It's a bold gambit, and bold gambits always draw the ire of the Imperium in the end. For instance, after the legendary conquests of Lord Solar Macarius in the 41st millennium, several of his own triumphant generals refused to relinquish the worlds they had conquered in his name. Following Macarius's death, these generals turned their private armies and territories into personal fiefdoms, igniting what became known as the Macarian heresy. A civil war erupted as these upstart warlords clashed with loyalist imperial forces. It took years of brutal campaigning for the Imperium to reassert control over those far-flung sectors. In the end, every one of those rebel generals was defeated and punished, and the message was clear: even the mightiest Imperial heroes cannot defy the Emperor's authority without dire consequences. That hangover of ambition after Macarius's Grand Crusade cost countless lives, all to stamp out a handful of would-be kings who learned too late that the Imperium tolerates no self-made emperors. Sometimes the spark is an ideological or religious schism. This is perhaps even more dangerous than material complaints or selfish power grabs, because it strikes at the heart of Imperial unity: belief. Remember, the Imperium isn't just a government, it's a theocracy. The Emperor is literally worshipped as a god, and the Imperial Creed is enforced by millions of zealot preachers and battle nuns with flamethrowers. So imagine a world where a new idea takes hold that runs against that grain. Perhaps a charismatic philosopher or a provincial governor starts preaching that the Emperor isn't a god at all, or that the Imperium has strayed from his light and is therefore illegitimate. Ironically, during the Emperor's own lifetime 10,000 years ago, he advocated a secular human empire. But that truth is long suppressed by the ecclesiarchy. Nowadays, saying the Emperor is just a man will earn you a bolt round to the head for heresy. If a planetary leadership were to collectively adopt such a heterodox view, say they announce they'll honor the Emperor's ideals, but will no longer follow the corrupt ecclesiarchy or imperial bureaucracy, well, that's effectively a rejection of the Emperor's authority as it exists today. Even if they couch it as reforming or saving the Imperium's true purpose, it's treason. Or consider a world that decides to allow religious freedom or to favor some minor variant of the imperial cult deemed heretical by the Central Church. That too can lead to rebellion. A concrete example: if a planet's rulers expel the Adeptus Ministorum, the official imperial church clergy, and shut down the Emperor's temples, claiming they're liberating the population from a fanatical cult, you can bet the wider Imperium will take that personally. They will call it apostasy, heresy, blasphemy, pick your term, and the response will likely involve the word purge. In these cases, the rebels might sincerely believe they are doing what's best for the Emperor's people, maybe even what the Emperor would have wanted in some philosophical sense, but it doesn't matter. Declaring that the Imperium's way of venerating the Emperor is wrong is as good as declaring the Emperor himself wrong, as far as Terra is concerned. And no one on Terra ever admits the Emperor, or by extension themselves, could be wrong. So ideological rebellions often meet with a particularly self-righteous and ferocious response, sometimes even led by the ecclesiarchy's own forces. The zealots of the Adeptus Sororitas, for instance, live for the chance to set heretics ablaze. History provides stark examples. During the Age of Apostasy, for instance, an ambitious cardinal of Gathalamor named Bucharest led a massive breakaway movement now infamously called the Plague of Unbelief. Preaching that Terra and the ecclesiarchy had fallen to corruption and that he was the true voice of the Emperor, this renegade cardinal managed to drag dozens of planets into open secession under his theocratic rule. For a time, he carved out a mini-empire, even hiding behind warp storms to shield his domain from reprisal. But the Imperium eventually answered. The Space Wolves chapter of Space Marines, together with other Imperial forces, fought a grueling campaign to liberate each world under Bucharest's sway. In the end, Bucharest was captured and executed after suffering dearly for his heresy, and his empire was extinguished planet by planet. The Plague of Unbelief demonstrated how one man's twisted ideology could beguile multitudes, and how utterly the Imperium would destroy those multitudes to restore order. It's a cautionary tale still told in hushed tones. Entire worlds burned because they followed a false prophet in defiance of the true Emperor. Then there's the ugly scenario of chaos corruption lurking behind the scenes. Many a rebellion in Imperial history has secretly been fanned to life by the ruinous powers, the Chaos Gods, working through cultists. This isn't just a governor fed up with taxes. This is the stuff of literal damnation. A chaos-inspired rebellion might start much like an ideological one, with secretive gatherings, a new belief system spreading among the disaffected. But it quickly devolves into true heresy. Perhaps a chaos cult promises the downtrodden masses that the Emperor is a false god, and that their gods, whether they name them or not, will bring prosperity or revenge. Maybe the planetary governor himself is seduced by whispers from a demon offering him unimaginable power if he only forsakes his oaths to the Imperium. Once the rot of chaos sets in, the trajectory is ghastly. You'll see things that make any common bureaucratic dispute look tame. Mass orgies of violence and debauchery, witchcraft and sorcery unleashed, mutations appearing among the populace as they give in to warp influences. By the time an Imperial official realizes a whole planet has said no under the influence of chaos, the planet might not even resemble what it was. It could be one giant blood-soaked altar to the dark gods. At that point, the world isn't simply in rebellion. It's an active warfare against the Emperor's soul. The troubling part, as if that isn't troubling enough, is that often such chaos rebellions don't even want independence. They might actually want to provoke Imperial intervention as a grand offering to chaos. Think of a corn cult reveling in the bloodshed of the coming war. Or they want to destabilize the Imperium as a whole. In any event, the Imperium's response to a chaos-tainted world is usually swift and merciless. Space Marines known as Grey Knights might be dispatched if demons are involved, and they will not hesitate to kill half the planet's population to banish a demon lord. Inquisitors of the Ordo Hereticus or Ordo Malleus will sanction extermination protocols with frightening readiness, whereas a world that rebelled over taxes might, just might, be allowed back into the fold after a beating. A world that turned to chaos will almost certainly be purged utterly. The Imperium's attitude is that it's better to lose the planet entirely than to let a demon-haunted or chaos-controlled world persist. We can't forget Xenos' influence either, the enemy without, as opposed to the enemy within. There are cases where alien forces are the ones pulling the strings of a human rebellion, or at least capitalizing on it. Two frequent offenders are gene stealers and the Tau Empire. Gene stealer cults are a particularly devious threat. A gene stealer is a Xenos creature that infects humans with its genetic material, creating hybrid offspring and a psychic bond that makes the infected individuals fanatically loyal to the future arrival of the Tyranids, a race of all-devouring aliens. Essentially, they're worshipping an incoming apocalypse. These cults operate in secret for years, even decades. They infiltrate the underhives, the PDF, the administrators, spreading their taint quietly. They often adopt populist rhetoric to win converts. Slogans like, "We, the downtrodden workers, must throw off our cruel overlords," or "The Emperor has abandoned us. Salvation lies with the true Star Children," not explicitly mentioning that those Star Children are ravenous extragalactic monsters that will consume everyone. By the time Imperial authorities catch on, the Gene's Stealer cult might have half the planet under its sway. Then comes the uprising, a planet-wide revolt against Imperial authority, often timed just as a Tyranid hive fleet is approaching the system. The cultists believe, wrongly but fervently, that when the Tyranids arrive, they'll be elevated or rewarded. In truth, they're just helping soften up the planet for consumption. Now, to an outside observer, this looks like a planet rejecting the Emperor under a bizarre alien-inspired creed. And that's exactly what it is. The Imperium's response to confirmed Gene's Stealer infestation is similar to chaos in some ways, extreme and terminal. If the cult is discovered early, maybe a purge can excise it and the world can be saved. But if the rot is too widespread, they will quarantine and scour the planet clean. They have little choice. If they hesitate, the Tyranids will show up and do worse. As for the Tau Empire, unlike the mindless Tyranids, the Tau come with a smile, a handshake, and an offer of alliance. They have, over the years, successfully convinced some human worlds, mostly on the eastern fringe of the galaxy near Tau territory, to secede from the Imperium and join the Tau's realm. The Tau ideology of the greater good can sound almost reasonable to disillusioned humans. A promise of unity, technological uplift, and peace, with some fine print, naturally, like giving up certain freedoms and accepting Tau leadership. To a world that's been suffering under the Imperium's heavy hand, the Tau can appear as saviors or liberators. We have accounts of planetary governors making secret treaties with nearby Tau commanders, arranging for a transition of power. One day, the planet stops transmitting to Imperial authorities, and when an Imperial ship finally swings by, they find the populace waving Tau banners and welcoming blue-skinned aliens as comrades. It doesn't even require a violent uprising in some cases. It might be a relatively bloodless coup where the pro-Tau faction takes control smoothly. However, the moment that news reaches the Imperium, they categorize it as outright treason and heresy. Consorting with Xenos is one of the big no-nos, right up there with worshipping chaos. The Tau themselves might try to defend their new human allies, which means any Imperial punitive force has to deal with well-armed, well-organized alien military units too. That complicates things, but it doesn't deter the Imperium. If anything, it enrages them more. Those human traitors become high-priority targets when the Imperium musters the resources to strike back. It might not happen immediately. The Eastern Fringe is distant, and wars with the Tau can be costly and time-consuming, but the Imperium holds grudges. One day, a crusade fleet will arrive to reclaim that world for the Emperor, and woe betide any Tau or human who stands in the way. In these scenarios, the initial rebellion might have been quiet, but the reconquest will be loud and devastating. To this day, there are a few human colony worlds that live under Tau governance rather than Imperial, a lasting stain on the record. Those humans, known as the Guevesa, Tau word for human helpers, are considered traitors by the Imperium, even if decades have passed since their defection. It may take centuries, but the Imperium does not forget. Whenever it strengthens its hold in that region, those worlds know a reckoning will come. The greater good will not save them when the Imperial Navy arrives in orbit with wrath and righteous fury. The existence of these Tau-allied humans is a thorn in the side of Imperial commanders, a constant reminder that some of mankind chose servitude to aliens over loyalty to the Emperor. Such a thing cannot be allowed to stand indefinitely. Finally, there's a scenario that isn't so much about malice or outside influence, sheer isolation and divergence. The Imperium is huge and often poorly connected. Some worlds simply slip through the cracks. Perhaps a warp storm severs a system's astropathic communications for a century. In that time, with no instructions or aid from the Imperium, the planet's society changes. Maybe they even start to doubt the Emperor's presence because no one's heard from Terra in ages. They might still honor his name, but they start governing themselves, developing local customs, perhaps tweaking the Imperial creed or resurrecting some ancient cultural practice that isn't strictly orthodox. When the warp storm clears and the Imperium returns to their doorstep saying, "Welcome back, resume obedience," the locals might not be too thrilled. To them, the Imperium is essentially a foreign power, reappearing to demand fealty and resources. They might respond, "We're fine as we are, thanks. We remember the Emperor, but we don't really want your governors or your tithes again." In a peaceful galaxy, maybe an arrangement could be made or diplomacy could smooth things over. But this is not a peaceful galaxy. It's one where the first response to disobedience is usually a gunshot. So even accidental or unintended rebellion, a world saying, "No, we don't want to rejoin," will likely be treated as full-blown heresy by the zealous agents of the Imperium. It's tragic in a way. These might be decent folk who kept the faith as best they could while isolated, yet because they diverged even slightly or enjoyed a taste of self-rule, they'll be crushed like any other traitors if they don't immediately submit again. In the late 41st millennium, the galaxy was split by a massive warp disturbance, the Great Rift, isolating countless worlds. In that time, some parts of the Imperium literally broke into two halves. Many worlds in the darkness of Imperium Nihilus had no guidance from Terra for years. Some likely drifted toward self-rule out of sheer necessity. When the Imperium, under Robut Guillemon's Indomitus Crusade, re-established contact, there were instances of friction. Worlds that had gotten used to autonomy were reminded roughly that their first and only master is the Emperor. Any local interim governments that tried to maintain independence were swiftly dissolved at bolt-gun point if needed. The lesson remained consistent. Even galaxy-wide disasters don't give a planet free license to leave the Imperium permanently. Often, a rebellion is a mix of these factors. Rarely is it cut and dry. Maybe high tithe demands, practical pressure, breed resentment which a cult, ideological or chaos, then exploits. And meanwhile, an opportunistic general fans the flames to elevate himself. It's a soup of grievances and schemes. But ultimately, all that matters to the Imperium is that the planet crossed the line. The instant a world moves from private grumbling to public defiance, be it refusing a tithe, ousting Imperial officials, raising a militia against Imperial law, or broadcasting some declaration of independence, the die is cast. At that moment, an Imperial world sheds its title and becomes something else entirely, an enemy. So, with the why established, let's move on to the next stage, the point of no return, when discontent erupts into open defiance. It's the day, or perhaps a slow-burning series of events, when an entire planet collectively dares to utter, "We are done with the Imperium. We reject the Emperor's rule." The moment of open rebellion, the point of no return, can unfold in various ways, but it's always dramatic. One day, the world is counted among the Emperor's domains. The next, it's in open insurrection. How does that break actually happen on the ground? Sometimes it's a sudden, sharp event. A proclamation echoing across the capital's Vox network declaring the planet's independence or new allegiance. Imagine the planetary governor, or whoever leads the uprising, standing on the grand balcony of his palace, addressing a crowd of citizens and astonished officials. He tears up the Imperial Charter on a live hololithic broadcast, perhaps even spits on the Imperial Aquila banner for good measure, and announces, "Our world will no longer bow to terror. We are free of the Emperor's commands." Gasps and cheers intermingle. Some people can't believe what they're hearing. Others, who have been in on the plan or seething under Imperial rule, roar in approval. That kind of singular moment seals the deed and lights the powder keg. Other times, rebellion arrives more quietly and then spreads like a brush fire. Perhaps it begins with an order to the Planetary Defense Force. Do not let the Imperial tithe ships land. The PDF, following the conspirators' instructions, suddenly turn their guns on a shuttle of Imperial tax collectors or a platoon of arbitrators from off-world, gunning them down rather than allowing them to set foot on the soil, or the planet's orbital defense stations, which normally salute arriving Imperial Navy vessels, instead open fire on them without warning. Picture an Imperial envoy ship coming in to dock, expecting the usual red carpet welcome, and boom, a defense laser turns it into a ball of plasma. That sends a crystal-clear message before any words are spoken. Often there's violence against representatives of Imperial authority on world. The Adeptus Arbites, the Imperium's militarized law enforcers, are usually among the first targets. These arbitrators are hardcore loyalists, an arm of Imperial justice that never negotiates with rebels, and everyone knows it. So rebel leadership will attempt to neutralize them immediately. Rebel PDF units might surround the Arbites' precinct fortress in the capital and assault it, or stage an accident that blows it sky high. If the Arbites are caught off guard, their stronghold falls in bloody street fighting, or they get massacred in their precinct houses. If they catch wind, they'll dig in and fight to the last bolt shell. Arbites have been known to hold out for weeks, even as the city around them falls. But generally, if the rebellion is widespread, sheer numbers will overwhelm the Arbites eventually. The same goes for any Imperial Guard garrisons stationed there. Sometimes a Guard regiment is posted to a world. If they remain loyal to the Emperor while the locals rebel, Oh boy, that's essentially war immediately. Then there's the ecclesiarchy, the priests and bishops of the imperial cult. If the rebellion is anti-imperial but not explicitly anti-emperor, for example, the rebels claim they're still faithful but hate the administratum's tyranny, they might try to leave the local ministorum alone or even co-opt them. Perhaps the planetary leaders say, "We still love the emperor, we're doing this for him, it's those corrupt bureaucrats on Terra we reject," hoping the clergy will support or at least not oppose them. In some cases, a high-ranking cleric might indeed side with the rebels, especially if the church on that world had its own gripes or was led by a secret heretic. But more often, the ecclesiarchy is a thorn in the rebels' side. Most ministorum priests will instinctively oppose anyone defying the wider Imperium. To them, the Imperium is the Emperor's will made manifest. So you can bet they'll call the rebel leaders heretics and call on the populace to resist. This can lead to really nasty scenarios. Imagine, on the day of rebellion, preachers in the Hive city squares booming through loud hailers, "Do not be deceived. This is heresy. Remain loyal," while rebel tanks roll by trying to disperse the crowds. The rebels might have to drag beloved local priests out of their pulpits and execute them publicly to snuff out that moral authority, which in turn can shock and cow some citizens or enrage others. Either way, it's a bloody mess. If the ecclesiarchy presence is strong, say there's a cardinal or a convent of battle sisters on world, an uprising might even fail at this stage because the faithful rally en masse. On worlds steeped in devotion, an order from a priest to take up arms for the emperor could spur 1,000,000 citizens into a spontaneous loyalist militia. Of course, then you get civil war within the civil war, neighbor versus neighbor, church-led zealots versus rebel PDF, tearing the world apart even before the Imperium proper intervenes. This highlights an important truth. Even if a planet says no as a whole, it's rarely literally everyone on the planet unified in defiance. There are always factions and individuals who remain loyal to the Emperor, or at least fearful of what this rebellion will bring. Especially initially, dissent within the rebellion itself will exist. A planetary governor might have his palace guard and some regiments on his side, but perhaps the Navy crew at the orbital station hesitate. So the rebels might have to send a boarding party to seize that station by force. Or a province or city governed by a particularly pious noble refuses to join the uprising, essentially declaring their own mini-rebellion against the rebel authority in the Emperor's name. The result? The planet plunges into internal conflict almost immediately. It could be quick if the rebel conspirators had a super-tight plan and eliminated opposition in one strike, decapitating all Imperial loyal officers and broadcasting unified propaganda so fast that resistance can't coalesce. But more often, there's at least some period of chaos and civil strife. Loyalist holdouts versus rebel forces, firefights in the streets, sabotage, confusion among the populace. If the rebellion was fomented by something like a chaos cult or gene stealer cult, then this initial phase is especially chaotic. No pun intended. You might see outright massacres. Cultists rise up from hiding and start slaughtering known Imperial loyalists, sacking the governor's mansion if he wasn't with them, or bombing the Adeptus Administratum offices. Meanwhile, terrified civilians lock their doors or join whichever side seems less likely to kill them on the spot. Insane propaganda broadcasts might loop on the Vox network. "Citizens, cast off your chains, embrace the new truth." Or conversely, from loyalist pockets, "Remain calm, the Emperor's forces will come, do not give in." Rumors spread like wildfire. 1 hour, people hear the governor has declared independence. The next, they hear Space Marines are already en route to punish them. Often not true that quickly, but fear runs high. Now, assuming the rebels manage to gain the upper hand and secure control over most of the planet's institutions, They've killed or imprisoned the Imperial officials who wouldn't play ball, silenced the outspoken loyalists, and cowed the populace. What then now? The rebel leadership faces a very nervous question. What will the Imperium do when they find out? Because they know the response will be fierce. Any sane rebel governor realizes that by stepping over this line, they've basically invited a galactic superpower to kick down their door in the near future. So they have a few choices, none of them great. One move is to hide it for as long as possible, censor astropathic communications, jam outbound signals, maybe even let scheduled tithes continue in a token way, if they have some stockpiles, to delay suspicion. Essentially, play along as if nothing has changed, at least externally, buying time to fortify. However, this only works until the next Imperial visit or missed shipment. It's a delaying tactic at best, and astropaths, those psychers who send messages through the warp, are hard to completely silence. The rebels might try to coerce their astropathic choir to keep quiet, or more likely they'll try to neutralize them, imprison them, or sadly kill them. Many a coup begins with an attempt to seize the Astropathica Enclave and Vox transmitters so that the planet is effectively muted. But loyalist astropaths might get a psychic scream out into the void before being caught. Something as simple as a fragmented message. World X, Governor Traitor, send help. Even that is enough to alert the wider Imperium that something's amiss. Another tactic is to fortify and arm up. The moment they seize power, rebel leaders often mobilize like mad to prepare for the inevitable counter-strike. Factories swing to full production of weapons. PDF units recall all furloughed troops and start digging trenches and setting up defense laser batteries. If the planet has void-capable ships, like system defense boats or armed merchant freighters, they might scramble those to form a ragtag defensive fleet in orbit. They know that when, not if, the Imperial fleet comes, they'll need every edge they can get. There's a frantic urgency to this period. The clock is ticking, though they don't know exactly how much time they have. It could be months, it could be years, depending on when the Imperium becomes aware and how quickly it can respond. So the rebels might even send out spies or use smugglers to get intel on the nearest Imperial fleet's position, hoping to estimate how long they've got. It's a strange interim. They have won their planet for the moment, but they all know it might be a very brief victory. Some rebels double down on legitimacy. Propaganda becomes crucial. They will try to win over the undecided population and keep their supporters fervent by painting their cause as just and necessary. The exact flavor of propaganda depends on their cause. If it was overbearing taxes and starvation that angered them, they'll say, "The Imperium would have left our children to starve. We had to take a stand. We are now the People's Planetary Republic," or whatever name they concoct, and we will thrive without those leeches on Terra. If it was a chaos or cult thing, they might proclaim, "We have been enlightened by new truths. The Emperor's lies kept us in darkness." Or some drivel along those lines. Maybe they won't mention chaos by name. Often they'll mask it as just a new interpretation of faith. If it's an independence/power play, maybe they appeal to planetary nationalism, rename the planet even, declare the leader as a sovereign monarch or president, and whip up pride. No longer shall we send our sons to die for distant masters. We will defend ourselves and keep our riches for our own. The goal is to unify the planet's populace so that when the Imperium comes, the people don't immediately betray the rebels from within. It doesn't always work. Many citizens, remembering history or just having common sense, might think, "This isn't going to end well. Maybe we should have stayed loyal." But fear and hope are powerful tools. The rebels will certainly try to portray the coming Imperial retribution as either not coming at all. They're too busy elsewhere, we're too small to bother with, which is usually a lie, or as a brutal invasion by oppressors that must be resisted. Do you want to be slaves again? No! Then fight for your freedom when the time comes. In some particularly Machiavellian cases, a rebel planet might seek external allies during this window of reprieve. A secular independence movement might reach out to nearby human renegades or pirates, hiring mercenaries or making pacts for mutual defense. A chaos-tainted leadership might call out into the warp, risky, but desperation breeds risk, to attract Chaos Space Marines or demons to bolster their side when the Imperials arrive, effectively inviting hellish allies that will likely cause as much harm as help. Of course, relying on chaos is like using a venomous serpent as a rope. It's going to bite you sooner or later. But desperate people make desperate choices. A world that broke away near Tau space might send a secret messenger asking the Tau for protection. Help us resist the Imperium, and we'll join your empire officially. The Tau might actually respond if it suits their expansion, sending a fleet or at least weapons and advisors. Similarly, a heretical planet might even consider contacting the Drukhari or another nasty Xenos faction for aid, though that's like trading one predator for another. These alliances are long shots and often end in betrayal or disaster. The Tau might come, but then expect to own the planet entirely. Chaos warbands will aid you only to drag you into damnation. Pirates may just take payment and run. But from the rebels' perspective, any port in a storm, right? They'll gamble on things that would have been unthinkable when they were still loyal Imperial subjects. Meanwhile, beyond the atmosphere, the wheels of Imperial retribution may already be turning. It could be that even as the rebel leader is making rousing speeches and hastily stringing barbed wire on the beaches, astropathic messages are zipping through the warp to Sector Command, alerting the Imperium. Planet X has fallen from the Emperor's grace. Send forces. If the rebels were extremely thorough and no word got out immediately, they might get a bit more breathing room, but eventually someone will notice something's off. Tithes not arriving. Scheduled communications missed. A visiting rogue trader or Mechanicus envoy stops by and gets a cold shoulder or sees the wrong flag flying, and word gets out. The Imperium has billions of eyes. It's hard to hide a whole world's status for long. So, at this stage, the planet is under new management, bracing itself, and perhaps enjoying a fleeting moment of triumph for the rebels, and dread for the loyalists in hiding. The populace is likely tense and afraid, regardless of which side they're on, because everyone knows that a storm is coming. It's just a question of when. Back in the halls of Imperial power, whether a sector governor's palace, an inquisitor's sanctum, or a fleet command deck, the reaction to news of a planet's rebellion is unambiguous: rage and resolve. The very instant it's confirmed that an Imperial world has turned traitor, a machine that's been honed over millennia kicks into gear. Administratum clerks red ink the planet's name in ledger books with labels like in extremis and subject pacification. Astropaths begin flashing emergency communiques to any Imperial forces nearby. An Inquisitor may get a priority message. A Space Marine chapter master might receive a terse request for intervention. The Segmentum Battlefleet Command is certainly alerted to mobilize. The exact chain of command can vary. Sometimes the Inquisition declares the planet excommunicate traitorous on the spot, especially if heresy or Xenos are suspected, basically marking it for extreme sanction. Other times, the sector governor issues a formal decree of rebellion and raises a crusade force. Either way, one outcome is certain. The Imperium will respond with overwhelming military force. There's an old saying in the Administratum, make a plan and the Emperor laughs. But when it comes to quashing rebellion, the Imperium doesn't see much humor. They have a playbook. First, they assess the situation. How many rebels? How well armed? Any chance of internal loyalists still holding out? Is there time to be surgical, or do we go in guns blazing? If an Inquisitor is in the loop, they'll be evaluating any signs of chaos or alien influence, because that might upgrade the threat level from rebellious province to planetary contamination, which in turn upgrades the response from reclaim it to purge it entirely. Let's say our hypothetical rebellious planet is deemed salvageable. No obvious demon portals swallowing cities or gene-stealer biomass jungles choking the streets. The Imperium will assemble a task force proportionate to the perceived defiance. And in typical Imperial fashion, they often err on the side of absurd overkill. Why send one regiment when 10 will do? Why send a squadron of cruisers when you can deploy a whole battle fleet? They want not only to crush the rebellion, but to make a terrifying example out of it. Surrounding planetary governors should be able to see the smoke from light years away, metaphorically speaking, and remember to stay in line. Over the following weeks or months, forces converge. From a nearby system, perhaps a detachment of the Imperial Navy's warships is rerouted. Massive troop transports begin mustering Imperial Guard regiments. These could be drawn from other planets in the same sector. Often neighboring worlds are ordered to contribute forces to punish their wayward cousin. Sometimes units that originally hailed from the now rebel planet, but were off-world, say fighting elsewhere, are reassigned to the relief force. Imagine the awkwardness and fury of soldiers going to subdue their own homeworld turned traitor. If available, one or more Space Marine chapters might volunteer or be petitioned to assist. The Adeptus Astartes have their own pride and often hate rebellions, since it reminds them, deep down, of the Horus Heresy, their greatest shame. If a chapter like the Ultramarines or Imperial Fists is in range, you may well get a company or 3 of power-armored Angels of Death dropping in for a righteous purge. If the rebellion has any whiff of blasphemy, the ecclesiarchy could dispatch the Adepta Sororitas, Sisters of Battle, essentially the Church's armored fanatics eager to cleanse heresy with flame. The Adeptus Mechanicus might toss in a manipule of battle automata, or even a god engine from a Titan Legio, if the world's heresy endangers their forge interests, especially if the rebel world was providing some key resource they want to secure. And certainly, an Inquisitor or their agents will tag along if they aren't outright commanding the whole show. In short, the Imperium gathers a crushing hammer, all aimed at the misbehaving planet. It's not always immediate. Coordination and warp travel take time. In a best-case scenario for the Imperium, worst case for the rebels, there's already a fleet in the sector finishing up some other operation that can be redirected swiftly. In other instances, if the rebellion happened in a relatively quiet region, they might need to wait for reinforcements from a sector capital far away. This could mean the rebels get a grace period of months, perhaps even a year or 2, before the storm breaks. Those among the rebels who are genre-savvy, or historically aware, know this, and likely spend each day fortifying with a growing knot in their stomach. The Emperor's wrath may be slow, but it is inevitable. Now, when the Imperial forces arrive, they may attempt a little formality, if only to tick the bureaucratic box that we gave them a chance. Typically, a final ultimatum is broadcast to the planet. Picture it. Dozens of capital ships translate out of warp and take position in high orbit, bristling with weapons. The rebels on the surface look up at the glittering lights in the sky with dread. Then across all frequencies comes the voice of the Imperial commander, maybe a cold Navy admiral or a zealous Inquisitor, announcing to the planetary authorities, "In the name of the Emperor of mankind, rightful lord of this and every world of humanity, you are ordered to stand down." Surrender your arms, deliver your leaders for Imperial judgment, and renew your oaths of loyalty. If you do this, the Emperor's mercy may yet be extended to some of you. If you refuse, well, we all know what's coming. They might not even bother finishing the threat. Everyone understands. Sometimes the message is shorter, almost curt. Traitors, your lives are forfeit. Die with whatever scraps of honor you have left, or beg. And see how we treat beggars. The exact wording varies with the personality in charge, but the subtext is always, you're screwed. Do rebels ever surrender at this point? It has happened occasionally. Facing certain annihilation, maybe the Planetary governor has a last-minute change of heart, or more cynically tries to save his own skin. He might send a reply shuttle with capitulation terms, or open the planetary defense shields and invite the Imperials in under a flag of truce. But throwing yourself on Imperial mercy is a gamble at best. The Imperium doesn't easily forgive rebels. More often, they'll accept your surrender just to lure you out and then execute you anyway. Still, if the rebel leadership is removed and the population prostrates itself, the Imperium might spare a portion of the populace significant collateral damage. It's not mercy so much as pragmatism. Easier to take over a functioning world than a burning wreck. But any leaders or officers of the rebellion are as good as dead, no matter what. Many rebels know this, so they figure they might as well fight to the bitter end. As a result, all-out surrenders are rare. More common is a defiant refusal or stony silence from the planet below. And so the die is cast. The invasion begins. The time for talk is over. Now comes the thunder of war. The Imperial Navy's first move is usually to secure space superiority. If the rebel planet has any orbital defense platforms or system ships, a void battle erupts. It's typically one-sided. The Navy brings perhaps a battleship and a few cruisers, plus escorts, whereas the planet might have a handful of small defense satellites and some antiquated frigates or converted freighters. There are instances of fierce fights. A well-placed railgun on a moon base can punch a hole in an Imperial light cruiser, or a desperate rebel captain might ram his ship into a Navy frigate. But such heroics only delay the inevitable. Within hours or days, the void around the planet belongs to the Emperor's forces. Now, nothing can get off the planet, and nothing can get in without Imperial approval. A blockade is established. If by chance some rebels try to flee in a ship, they might slip out during the chaos of battle, but any stragglers leaving late are going to be vaporized by picket destroyers. The Imperium is not in a forgiving mood, remember. With orbital space secure, the Imperials then perform precision orbital strikes. The goal, knock out the planet's defenses and soften up key military targets. Enormous guns on the Navy ships, macro cannons, lance batteries. Begin picking off obvious hits. The rebels' anti-aircraft missile silos? Gone in plumes of flame. That fortified PDF barracks outside the capital? A salvo from the heavens turns it into a crater by breakfast time. The communications array on Mount Sarion that the rebels have been using to coordinate? One lance beam later, it's molten slag. The night side of the planet might suddenly glow with the light of impact blasts. On the ground, the populace trembles as artificial meteors streak overhead. Orbital bombardment is a terrifying drum roll announcing the Imperium's return. Down below, in Hive Primus, ordinary people can only watch and tremble as the heavens erupt. A factory worker named Lyra cradles her young son in a maintenance closet, having fled there when the defense lasers began firing. Now the lights flicker off and on, and each distant thunderclap from the orbital strikes causes dust to rain from the ceiling. She whispers a half-remembered prayer to the Emperor, even as she wonders if he's the one raining destruction upon them. Across the hive, thousands huddle under stairwells, in basements, anywhere they think might be safe. The lucky ones are only in darkness and fear. The unlucky find themselves in the direct path of those lance strikes. Entire hab blocks collapse, sending plumes of debris into the air. One moment, a family might be crouched under their dining table. The next, a section of roof gives way and they're gone in an avalanche of pliskrete and steel. Lyra doesn't know it, but a lance has just obliterated the administratum offices 2 levels above her. The shockwave of that impact blows out the hab's windows and causes her ears to bleed. Her toddler starts screaming from the pressure change and pain. She holds him tight, tears in her eyes, praying for this nightmare to end. The nightmare is only beginning. Now come the landing forces. If Space Marines are involved, they might have already made a surgical strike before the main landings. For example, dropping in via assault pods straight into the heart of the enemy command structure. Indeed, a Space Marine chapter, say the Ultramarines or a more unforgiving chapter like the Minotaurs, might volunteer to spearhead the assault as an honor. When they do, it's almost unfair how effective it is. One moment, the rebel generals in their bunker think they have a plan. The next, the ceiling blows open and 8-foot-tall super soldiers in ceramite armor are crashing through, bolters roaring. An Astartes strike can decapitate a whole defensive network within an hour of the war's start. They'll target the rebel leadership, anti-orbital laser batteries, shield generators, if any, and other high-value targets. It's shock and awe incarnate. An example scenario: a rebel governor's final moments being a pair of enormous transhuman warriors bursting into his throne room, giving him one last chance to kneel, if he's lucky, then executing him on the spot when he inevitably reaches for a weapon or a defiant word. The Iron Talons chapter of Space Marines did exactly this in one rebellion, slaying the secessionist governor and his guards in one fell swoop. It was efficient, but also a bit frightening to the Imperials themselves, because it shows just how lethal Marines are when turned loose on normal humans. One Inquisitor noted that unleashing Space Marines on an Imperial population, even a traitorous one, is only one step short of Exterminatus in terms of overkill. The Space Marines tear into the rebel defenders with shocking violence. Rebel troopers who had never even seen a Space Marine before quail at the sight of giants in adamantine plate charging through the smoke. One PDF squad makes the mistake of standing their ground and firing. The Marines barely slow down, bolt rounds blowing the unfortunate defenders apart a heartbeat later. Another group flees, tossing aside weapons and running for the vaults. A hulking Terminator in the Marines' ranks cuts them off, a sweep of his power fist literally smashing a fleeing soldier into a wall with bone-splattering force. In the span of maybe 2 minutes, halls that had been filled with shouting and lass fire are reduced to silence, save for the heavy footfalls of Astartes stepping over gore-soaked floor tiles. It's as much a psychological assault as a physical one. Any rebels still alive in the vicinity realize that what they face are no mere men at all, but the Emperor's angels of death from the old legends. Some throw down their arms and beg for mercy. They receive none. Others simply freeze in terror, unable to fight or flee. The Iron Talons press on with machine efficiency, securing the planet's palace level by level, leaving only the dead in their wake. Rebel troopers in other areas might manage some successes against lesser forces. But once Marines have done their spearhead work and knocked out key defenses, the mass assault begins. Huge landers and dropships scream through the atmosphere, braving any remaining ground fire. There's always some unlucky pilot who catches a missile, but the majority get through. They deploy the Imperial Guard regiments in waves. Depending on the planet's geography, this could involve securing a spaceport as a beachhead or dropping directly into open fields and establishing a forward base. often at least one relatively flat zone, a desert plain outside a hive city or a coastal port facility, is chosen as the primary landing site. The rebels might concentrate forces there to oppose the beachhead, but if orbit is lost, it's hard to stop the Imperium from landing troops somewhere. They've got teleportation arrays for elite units, grav chutes for airborne infantry, and sometimes they just brute force it. Drop a regiment of Cadian shock troops into the outskirts of a city and let them fight block by block. Now the war truly grinds on in earnest, and it is hell on Earth, or whatever Earth-like planet it is. The rebels, knowing their backs are against the wall, often fight ferociously. Some are fanatical, especially if chaos or cult conditioning is involved. Others are simply desperate not to be executed as traitors, and hoping that if they can inflict enough casualties, maybe the Imperium will reconsider. Spoiler, the Imperium won't. The Imperial Guard, for their part, unleash the Emperor's wrath with a zealous mix of vengeance and duty. Many guardsmen harbor a special contempt for human traitors. They'll often be heard shouting, "Remember Kadia," or "For the Emperor," as they storm trenches, taking out their frustrations at the galaxy's endless threats on these fellow humans who dare to make it even harder by turning coat. Let's zoom in on a likely scene, the primary hive city that serves as the planetary capital. Its lower levels and spires have become battlefields. Street by street, guardsmen advance behind armored columns. Leman Russ battle tanks chugging forward, heavy bolters thudding. Rebels have barricaded the avenues with overturned haulers and sandbags. They respond with lasgun and autogun fire from windows and makeshift bunkers. Civilians, those who haven't fled or been conscripted, cower in hab-block basements praying for it all to end. A unit of insurgent militia, maybe factory workers handed rifles, sprays wildly at the oncoming Imperial troops. In return, a Basilisk artillery tank miles away lobs a shell that obliterates half the hab-block they're in. The brutality is beyond anything they'd imagined when they first dreamed of freedom. Limbs, rubble, and shattered Imperial icons mix in the smoking ruins of a marketplace. Overhead, Imperial Navy fighters and gunships streak by, dueling with the last of the rebel air forces. Perhaps the rebels managed to convert some cargo haulers into makeshift bombers or held onto a few atmospheric fighters. They'll score a few victories. Maybe a valiant rebel pilot shoots down a Thunderbolt fighter here, or a lucky ground-launched missile blows an Imperial Valkyrie out of the sky there. These small successes are inevitable in war, but they don't change the course. They're footnotes in the eventual Imperial victory report. In the heat of the battle, there may be moments of heroism and horror on both sides. A rebel tank ace ambushes an Imperial armored column in the ruins of a manufactorum, blasting 3 Leman Russ tanks before a melt-a-gun team flanks and turns his vehicle into molten slag. A squad of Imperial stormtroopers, elite Tempestus Scions, rappels from a Valkyrie transport into the governor's palace courtyard under heavy fire, sustaining casualties but managing to raise the banner of the Imperium over the building after a brutal firefight with the last palace guards. In the underhive sewers, perhaps some pockets of civilians who still worship the Emperor emerge, led by an old confessor carrying a dented Aquila, and sabotage a rebel ammo dump, blowing themselves up in the process, but taking a chunk of the enemy with them. Every alley and corridor becomes a microcosm of the war's fury. On another front, a towering Imperial Titan war machine, imagine a walking fortress the size of a city block, strides implacably through an industrial district. Rebels throw everything they have at it, tank shells, missiles, desperate artillery strikes. But the Titan's void shields flare and hold, shrugging off the attacks. With a deafening boom, it returns fire from its massive cannons, obliterating an entire column of rebel armor and blasting open the gates of a fortified manufactorum complex. The ground shakes with each step of its titanic feet. For the rebel soldiers witnessing this behemoth, it is the Emperor's wrath made metal, and it breaks whatever courage they had left. Some drop their weapons and flee at the sight. Others stand and fire uselessly until they're vaporized by its weapons. A titan on the battlefield essentially means the Imperium has decided to make a point. No rebel stronghold is safe from absolute destruction. Despite pockets of fierce resistance, the outcome is hardly in doubt. The rebels simply cannot match the inexhaustible resources and training of the Imperial war machine. An Imperial Guard regiment that gets chewed up taking one district will be relieved by another fresh regiment the next day, whereas the rebels have finite numbers and no reinforcements. Their defensive lines start to break under relentless pressure. Some rebel commanders might attempt last stands to etch their name in history, holding the governor's citadel or the central plaza until the very end. These usually conclude with the Imperials blowing open a fortress door, storming in with fixed bayonets and flamethrowers, and slaughtering everyone inside. Other rebel units see the writing on the wall and try to disappear, ditching uniforms, blending in with civilians, maybe retreating into wilderness areas to start a guerrilla insurgency. They might succeed in hiding for a time, and indeed some conflicts turn into drawn-out whack-a-mole campaigns of the Imperium hunting guerrillas in the hills for months or years after the main battles are over. But organized resistance as a governing authority ends the moment the Imperial banner is raised again over the capital and the main rebel army is crushed. During those final throes, rebels might resort to scorched earth tactics, purely out of spite. There are accounts of traitor commanders overloading their city's plasma reactors or torching their own infrastructure rather than let it be captured. A rebel general might detonate ammunition stockpiles across a hive, causing firestorms that kill friend and foe alike, just to deny the victors a functional prize. Poisoning water supplies, setting fire to agridomes, even using forbidden weapons on their own soil. Some rebellions end with the rebels literally trying to drag the whole planet down with them. The Imperium expects this kind of fanaticism and is prepared to weather it, but it adds yet more tragedy to the ordeal. By the time the shooting stops, parts of the planet might be uninhabitable wastelands, not just from Imperial bombardment, but from the rebels' own self-destructive acts. It is the ultimate bitterness, the rebels essentially proclaiming, if we can't have this world, then no one can. We should touch on what happens if the rebellion had truly heinous elements, like chaos or xenos during this war phase. If, say, the rebels were chaos corrupted and summoned demons in desperation, then the war takes an even more dreadful turn. Imperial forces, already ruthless, become outright apocalyptic in their response. Exterminatus might come back on the table. If this hive is overrun by demons, better to vaporize it from orbit. If gene stealers pop up, perhaps the rebels in the sewers turn out to be four-armed monstrosities ambushing guardsmen. Then the commanders will call in special kill teams, or just decide to virus bomb that sector and chalk it up to necessary collateral. These incidents ensure that even among the Imperial troops, fear is present. They are fighting humans, yes, but always with the suspicion that something worse could rear its head. Many a guardsman has gone into a rebellion suppression, expecting to fight mortal traitors, only to find themselves facing gibbering mutants or an armored Chaos Space Marine leading the rebels. Those moments are terrifying, but the Imperium plans for them too. Elite units like the Inquisition stormtroopers or a Death Watch kill team might be embedded for exactly that reason, to handle the freak show elements, while the rank and file handle the regular traitor guardsmen. One way or another, after a period of intense combat, it could be days, weeks, or months for a big world, The organized rebel resistance is broken. The planetary defense force of the traitors is annihilated or surrenders in scattered pockets. Their leaders are dead, in chains, or on the run. Not that there's anywhere to run, the Navy has likely cordoned off the system. Imperial tanks are patrolling the streets of every major city, crunching over debris and graffiti that said, "Imperium, go home," now partially charred off the walls. The air is thick with the dust of bombardment and the acrid stench of promethium from all those flamethrowers that cleared out bunkers. Victory, such as it is, belongs to the Imperium. The planet is formally back under Imperial control. But the cost, oh, the cost. If you were an ordinary citizen of this world, you have just lived through a nightmare. Your cities may lie in ruins. Your sons and daughters who fought on either side are likely dead or maimed. Your infrastructure is shattered. The victorious Imperial troops are not exactly gentle liberators. They're more like conquerors who now look around with a "what now" expression, boots bloodied and trigger fingers still itchy. The planet lies prostrate, awaiting whatever punishment or restructuring the Imperium will decree next. Before we talk about that aftermath, take a moment to consider. This entire war, this apocalypse that rolled over the world, was essentially the answer to that one word, no. The rebels said, "No, we won't obey." And the Imperium answered with bolters, lasfire, and orbital fire until no became no one left to keep fighting. When the smoke finally clears and the last gunshots fade, the aftermath begins. A phase perhaps just as brutal in its own way. The planet lies at the mercy of the Imperium. Not that mercy is a common Imperial trait. Now comes the reckoning. Immediate retribution. First on the agenda is making an example of the traitors. Any rebel leaders who were captured alive, the governor, his generals, high-ranking officials, cult priests, etc., are in for a very short and unpleasant future. There might be a summary tribunal led by an inquisitor or a commissar where the verdict is a foregone conclusion. If they're lucky, they get a swift execution by firing squad. If they're not, public executions become the order of the day. The Imperium loves a good public execution to drive the point home. So, in the biggest plaza of the capital, or what's left of it, they'll stage a grand spectacle. The traitor governor and his inner circle paraded out in chains, forced to their knees before a gathering of cowed survivors. Perhaps a sermon is delivered by a fiery confessor of the ecclesiarchy, condemning their souls to oblivion. Then heads roll, literally if a power sword or guillotine is used, or in an even more theatrical twist, the Arbites could hang them from the ruins of the governor's own palace balcony. It's a grim spectacle, the Imperium turning the ruins of rebellion into a stage for renewed obedience. And yes, people are forced to watch. Attendance may be mandatory for all surviving citizens, so the lesson sears itself into collective memory. But punishment doesn't stop at the top. The purge runs deep. The Imperial forces fan out and round up anyone suspected of having significantly aided the rebellion. PDF officers, local officials who threw in their lot with the traitor government, propagandists who gave speeches in favor of independence, even factory bosses who redirected supplies to rebel armies. All of them become candidates for execution or harsh labor sentences. The definition of traitor can be very broad when the victors are doing the categorizing. Some poor citizens might be summarily shot just for having worn a rebel armband or shouted support at the wrong rally. The attitude of the conquering force is usually, "Let the Emperor sort them out." They'd rather err on the side of eliminating any possible seditious element than risk leaving embers that could reignite. Those not immediately executed might face other fates. For example, inquisitors sometimes consign select high-value traitors to a living death of servitude as mind-wiped servitors, part man, part machine drones devoid of personality. A rebellion's tech-adept leader, for instance, could find himself lobotomized and wired into a labor engine as punishment, forced to toil until his augmented body gives out. Others might be shipped off-world to penal colonies or inducted, under heavy watch, into penal legion military units, effectively a delayed death sentence wearing the guise of a second chance. The Imperium's retribution has many shades of horror, not all as quick as a firing squad. Inquisitorial presence. If the rebellion had any whiff of heresy, and which rebellion doesn't from the Imperium's perspective, the Inquisition will be heavily involved in the aftermath. Inquisitors, particularly of the Ordo Hereticus, the branch that deals with heresy and internal betrayal, might conduct rigorous investigations and interrogations. Entire populations can be subjected to purity tests. This could be as straightforward as gathering townsfolk and making them recite loyalty oaths until someone slips up, or as exotic and horrifying as inquisitorial psychers scanning minds en masse for signs of chaos taint. Imagine standing in a crowd as a black-clad inquisitor with a burning equals rosette walks by with his pet psycher's eyes glowing. Suddenly, a few people around you start screaming, their heads literally bursting, or they're racked by convulsions, identified as having had unclean thoughts or warped tampering. Those individuals are dragged out. If they're lucky, they're dead already. If not, they soon will be. If a whole town was particularly supportive of the rebellion or a hotbed of cult activity, the Inquisition might declare the entire population beyond redemption. Exterminatus doesn't only mean orbital destruction. At ground level, it can mean mass summary execution. Firing lines of Imperial Guard might systematically work through hab block after hab block, executing tens of thousands under inquisitorial order, because someone with authority has deemed the area irredeemably corrupted. This is not hyperbole. The Imperium literally has in its doctrine the concept of exterminatus, the death of a world, for cases where heresy or alien corruption is terminal. They might not always enact it planet-wide, but they certainly can apply it to a city or continent. The Inquisitor on scene might refrain from blowing up the world if it's deemed salvageable, but they won't hesitate to purge huge swaths of population if contaminated. On the other hand, the Inquisition may identify pockets of the populace that tried to remain loyal or were simply swept along without choice. Those people might be spared immediate death, but they won't exactly get a pat on the back either. At best, they get a stern re-indoctrination. At worst, they're shipped off to grim fates like penal colonies anyway, just to be sure. Ecclesiarchy and re-sanctification. The Church, too, has work to do. Assuming the planet isn't completely exterminated, the Ecclesiarchy will want to cleanse and reconsecrate everything in sight. If rebels defiled the Emperor's statues or shrines, the priests will order those rebuilt bigger than before. Picture a new massive cathedral erected in the capital, with labor provided by crews of repentant locals under armed overseers. Perhaps the highest spire of this new cathedral is deliberately built on the site where the rebel leader's body fell, as a symbolic reclamation of the ground for the God Emperor. The populace will be forced, or fervently inspired, depending on the person, to attend re-sanctification masses. Everyone will publicly swear oaths of loyalty and fidelity to the Emperor anew, likely while kneeling on ground still stained with blood. The Ecclesiarchy has been known to prescribe acts of contrition for entire worlds, lengthy fasting periods, enforced prayer vigils, processions where citizens must march through the streets, whipping themselves in repentance. Again, is this voluntary? Mostly not when the Sisters of Battle with Flamers are encouraging you to join the penance march. You join the penance march. The message hammered home in every sermon and on every propaganda poster, those will be plastered everywhere now, is this was the price of disloyalty. Never again. It's both a warning and a weird sort of reconditioning. In time, with enough repetition, many survivors might actually convince themselves that the rebellion was a horrible mistake or a sin they were seduced into, and that the Imperium saved them from themselves. The human mind in 40,000 is frighteningly adaptable, or perhaps just desperate to find a way to cope. After a few years of relentless propaganda and enforced piety, a kind of collective denial often sets in. We weren't really trying to rebel, we were misled. But thank the Emperor, we're back in his grace now. It's a psychological survival tactic encouraged by the Imperium. Reconstruction and repression. Practically speaking, after a planetary rebellion, the Imperium has to decide how to get the planet back on its feet, primarily so it can be productive and pay tithes again, of course. The infrastructure damage might be severe. Key factories, spaceports, and farms could be in ruins. The population might be drastically reduced from war and purges. Billions can die quickly when virus bombs and mass executions enter the mix. So, often the Administratum will reduce the tithe grade for a short period, acknowledging reality. You can't squeeze water from a stone. They might send some tech priests or mechanicus tech teams to help rebuild critical facilities. In some cases, neighboring worlds are ordered to contribute resources or even settlers to help repopulate and rebuild the shattered planet. However, this isn't benevolence. It's an investment to ensure the world becomes useful again. The expectation is that within a few years or decades, the world will resume its duties to the Imperium, perhaps even in an increased capacity to atone for its betrayal. The new ruler of the planet will certainly be an Imperial appointee, often a hardliner. If an Inquisitor oversaw the pacification, they might directly assign a trusted Imperial commander as the new planetary governor, or even declare martial law indefinitely with the planet under a sort of military governorship. Autonomy? Forget about that. Any local nobles or officials who survived and didn't overtly side with rebels might petition to be given leadership, but the Imperium will be extremely suspicious of anyone native. Likely they'll import a governor from off-world, someone with a proven loyalty record, maybe even a relative of a high-ranking Imperial officer, to rule with an iron fist. A hefty occupation force often remains, at least for a time. For instance, if 5 guard regiments were deployed, 1 or 2 might be left stationed on planet as a permanent garrison to enforce order. The Adeptus Arbites will certainly rebuild their precinct fortress, bigger and more fortified than before, and expand their presence, since clearly law and order broke down last time. One can easily imagine the Arbites' chief saying to new recruits from off-world, "This planet slipped once. It will not slip again on my watch," as he surveys avenues now lined with watchtowers and autocannon emplacements. One can't ignore the possibility that the Imperium decides the world simply isn't worth reintegrating in its current state. If, for example, the rebellion and ensuing battle devastated the environment or the population so badly that recovery is unfeasible, the Administratum might officially classify the planet as Exterminatus. In that case, they might evacuate whatever key personnel or resources can be salvaged, and then either quarantine the planet or even formally Exterminatus it after the fact to eliminate a lingering taint. Imagine that, surviving the war only for a new order to come down that says, actually, scrub the entire site. It's happened in extreme cases where chaos corruption was thought to linger or if the world's value was negligible after the war. More commonly, though, they'll try to salvage it. Every world is valuable real estate in a galaxy of trillions. For the average surviving citizen, life after the rebellion's suppression is a strange, haunted existence. On one hand, the open fighting is done, so there's relief that the shelling has stopped and one might not get shot today. On the other hand, now they live in a conquered city under stern occupation. Curfews are imposed. If the war wrecked food distribution, rationing continues under the watch of armed guards. The streets are patrolled by Imperium troops who might not speak the local dialect and have zero sense of humor. Public gatherings are forbidden except for approved Imperial indoctrination sessions. Anyone even remotely suspected of seditious thought is denounced. Neighbors spy on neighbors either out of newfound fanaticism or just to avoid being accused themselves. It's a very Orwellian atmosphere, constant fear, enforced loyalty. Over time, this will probably relax slightly. The Imperium doesn't actually have the manpower to micromanage every street forever, but the first few years, even decades, are extremely repressive. The wider lesson. News of the planet's punishment will likely spread intentionally. The Imperium, despite having poor interstellar news in the civilian sense, does ensure that tales of caution circulate among those who need to hear them. Surrounding worlds' governors might receive a formal notice. Be advised that Planet Redacted attempted to rebel and has been pacified. Its tithe will resume next cycle. The former governor and all co-conspirators have been executed by order of the High Lords for Segmentum Command. Let this serve as a warning to any who would defy the Emperor's will. Usually, that's enough to send shivers down the spine of other would-be malcontents. The Imperium may also dispatch missionaries or propaganda teams to nearby systems to recount the heroic reclamation of the world and the fate of the traitors, just to drive the point home to the masses. It's like heads on pikes along the roadside, but on a galactic scale, demonstrating, through one world's ruin, what awaits any other that falters. Maybe it's worth considering the dark irony. Had the rebellious world somehow been left alone by the Imperium? An almost impossible scenario, to be sure, but suppose it likely wouldn't prosper in peace. Instead, it would become easy prey for the galaxy's other horrors. An independent human planet without the Emperor's aegis is a juicy target for alien empires and raiders. Orc warlords love nothing more than pouncing on a world that stands alone. Drukhari pirates would sense the vulnerability and swoop in to enslave and slaughter. And of course, the insidious tendrils of chaos would find fertile ground in a place already willing to defy the Imperium. In short, even if the Emperor's armies didn't punish rebellion, something else would come along to finish the job. There's no real winning for a planet that leaves the Imperium. It's a choice between one type of doom and another. That's the final cruel truth in all of this. Over decades, the planet will either recover or become a shell of its former self, depending on how severe the destruction was. But what's certain is that it will never be quite the same. The scar of rebellion runs deep. The culture may be forcibly reshaped. Holidays commemorating local heroes might be replaced with days of imperial martyrdom and thanksgiving. If the planet had a distinctive name tied to the rebellion, the Imperium might even change that name officially. Typically, they'll just continue calling it by the original name, but always with the mental footnote, that place that went traitor in 999 M41, or whenever. Sometimes the administratum does append a suffix like Secundus or Tertius to denote a refounded world after a major purge. One day, generations later, the events will pass from living memory. The rebuilt cities will hum with industry again. The people will go about their lives, and the rebellion will be a chapter in history books, likely a very propagandized chapter. The official Imperial version might frame it as a cautionary tale of a few bad actors leading the population astray, only to be righteously punished. They will never admit any Imperial fault in causing it, like starvation or oppression. No, it will solely be attributed to heresy, Xenos influence, or personal greed. Schools, if any, will teach children that their forebears sinned and that they must never repeat those mistakes. In a grim way, life returns to the normal of the Imperium: drudgery, duty, and fear of authority, possibly even more intense than before. And what of those who might secretly still hold a grudge? Perhaps a handful of survivors, maybe a young child who watched her parents executed for being rebels, grows up nursing hatred. Maybe years later, that child tries to start a small resistance of her own, or just harbors ill will in her heart. But practically, there's not much she can do, not with the eyes of the Arbites and the Inquisition ever present. Some embittered souls might find their way off-world as refugees or stowaways. Those, ironically, could become problems elsewhere. A refugee from a purged world might turn rogue, become a smuggler, or even join a chaos cult out of despair, basically spreading the poison around. But that's beyond the scope of this particular world's fate. If discovered, they'll be hunted mercilessly too. In summary, the aftermath is twofold. On the ground, a combination of draconian punishment and gradual rebuilding. And beyond, a loud and clear warning to others. The world is brought back into the Imperial fold, scarred, subdued, and forever marked. The Imperium moves on to its next crisis. There's always another war or rebellion brewing somewhere. But it leaves behind garrison troops, new laws, and a population that has stared into the abyss, and had the abyss stare back with the eyes of the Imperial Aquila. It's telling that 10 millennia ago, the Imperium survived the massive rebellion of half the Space Marine legions and several Primarchs during the Horus Heresy. That galaxy-wide civil war plunged mankind into chaos and nearly slew the Emperor himself, yet it ultimately failed to break the Imperium's rule. If even the rebellion of demigods and the finest warriors in human history could not free humanity from the Emperor's grasp, a single planet's revolt certainly stands no chance. The lesson has been writ large since those ancient days. The Imperium may bleed, but it does not bow. However unjust or heavy the yoke, worlds that try to cast it off only end up crushed beneath it. A case study, the doom of a defiant world. To truly grasp the grim sequence we've outlined, let's walk through a single planet's rebellion from start to finish. Imagine a mid-sized hive world on the far edge of Imperial space. It's a productive place, or was, supplying regiments of Imperial Guard and countless tons of ore to the Imperium's war machine. Let's say this world has endured generations of hardship, endless tithe demands, occasional raids by pirates and Xenos, a dwindling economy as more and more of its able-bodied men and women are shipped off to distant wars. The people are loyal, but each year it's gotten harder to scrape by. Morale is low. Famine whispers at the door in some provinces because so many farmers were conscripted. The Planetary governor, we'll call him Governor Solari, a stout man with more heart than sense, has dutifully met every requirement the Imperium set, hoping things would get easier. They only get harder. Our story begins with Governor Solari receiving a new order from Segmentum Command. Another tithe of 10 million soldiers is due immediately for a crusade mustering on the other side of the sector. The Astra Militarum needs fresh meat for the grinder. Solari reads this demand in his grand office atop the primary hive spire, and his hands tremble. 10 million more. He thinks of the last tithe, just 3 standard years ago when they took 8 million. There aren't even that many healthy adults left undrafted now, and those that remain are desperately needed in the factories, fields, and local PDF. The governor sends back a polite astropathic request for extension or reduction. The answer that comes weeks later is simply a repetition of the demand, perhaps even larger than before. Some distant bureaucrat likely decided this world could spare a few million extra. The deadline is set. Munitorum ships are already en route to collect the new regiments. Solari convenes his planetary council. It's a tense meeting. Generals, adepts, the chief confessor of the local ecclesiarchy, guild masters. He tells them, voice wavering, that he intends to ask the Imperium for relief once more. Some advisors support him, saying the numbers truly are impossible. Others blanch at the very suggestion of defying an order. One member of the council, Lord Commander Militant Trevaillan, the PDF's commanding general, argues passionately that if they comply with this tithe, the planet will be left defenseless against the orc pirates that have been harrying the outer provinces. Better a reprimand from Terra than our planet overrun by greenskins, he growls. The council murmurs agreement. They all recall that just last year, an orc raiding fleet slipped past the Navy patrols and hit the northern moon mining colonies. The PDF barely repelled them, and only at great loss. If another raid comes and they've given away more troops, it could be catastrophic. What none of them say aloud, but all feel in their bones, is this. The Imperium doesn't care about their local problems. Begging hasn't helped. And if they just obey and hope for the best, the result will likely be the slow death of their world, either by external attack or internal collapse. Governor Solari, who genuinely cares for his planet's people, a rarity in the 41st millennium perhaps, makes a fateful decision. He decides that this time he will not comply. We must take care of our own, Solari says quietly, eyes downcast as if the weight of those words is physically pressing on him. The room falls silent. Even the air, Repsych units, seem to hum quieter, as if shocked. The chief confessor clutches the aquila around his neck and whispers a prayer, whether for guidance or in fear, who can say? No official vote is taken, but the council's silence and slight nods are enough. The decision is made. The world will say no. Of course, they know what will likely come of this. Trevan, the PDF commander, immediately doubles patrols around the astropathic choir chambers. They have astropaths who could send a message to Terra or Segmentum authorities about this brewing rebellion. Solari doesn't want that. He visits the choir masters personally and explains, with gentle words hiding an implicit threat, that they are to stay quiet about the tithe refusal. A few astropaths object. One elderly woman fervently argues that to ignore a direct order from the Lords of Terra is heresy. She is later found dead, officially by a sudden psychic backlash. Unofficially, one of Solari's spy masters had her quietly silenced. Word is put out among the remaining astropaths. Keep your mouth shut if you want to live. It's a dangerous play. Without astropathic contact, the world is essentially declaring independence. But Solari hopes that by the time anyone in the Imperium realizes they've gone dark, it'll be too late to matter. Or they'll have fixed their population shortfall and can spin a story. Next, Solari and his council prepare for the inevitable confrontation. They don't openly announce, "We're rebelling." Not yet, anyway. Instead, they adopt a posture of, "We simply cannot meet the tithe right now." When the Munitorum tithe ships arrive in orbit a few weeks later, the trouble starts. The administratum officers aboard hail the planet, politely at first. "Shuttle us down to begin processing of the new regiments." They receive a response from the governor's office. "Regretfully, we cannot supply those regiments at this time." The orbiting officials are baffled. Such refusal is almost unheard of. They repeat the demand. Solari himself, visibly strained but firm, appears on the Vox to state the same. "We cannot comply. Our previous levies have bled us to the bone. By my authority, this world will not be contributing additional regiments until it is secure and stable." There, he said it. The no that will seal his world's fate. The lead administratum tithe officer aboard, down from his gilded orbital cutter, is apoplectic. He threatens Solari with sanctions, with charges of treason. Solari, surrounded in his spire by armed guards now, ends the transmission with a curt, "May the Emperor understand our plight." It's possibly the most blasphemously optimistic hope he could utter. Realizing the gravity, the Tithe officer immediately tries to send an astropathic distress call to Segmentum Command. Planet redacted, refusing Tithe, possibly in open rebellion. But before that astropath can finish sending, Governor Solari's agents move. In the orbital dock where the Tithe ship's astropath sits in her sanctum, a contingent of the planet's PDF storms the chamber. A brief, bloody skirmish ensues, last fire in the dark, screams, and then silence. The astropath lies dead, along with a dozen of Solari's troopers. The Psyker managed one psychic scream that liquefied some attackers before being shot through the heart. The Tithe officer himself is captured at gunpoint and brought planetside. This is outright armed sedition now. There's no going back. Governor Solari hadn't wanted bloodshed to start things, but he's pragmatic enough to know that by refusing, he crossed the Rubicon. His men detain the Administratum delegation and any Imperial personnel on planet. Tech priests at the spaceport, navigators, attachés, etc. Some cooperate once under guard. Others try to resist and are summarily executed. The governor plans to hold the Tithe officer and others as leverage, perhaps to bargain later. Please explain to your superiors. We had no choice, he imagines pleading. That's likely a foolish hope, but at this stage he's grasping at any straw to avoid the worst outcome. At this point, news of the defiance spreads through the planet's hive cities. Rumors fly. The governor is refusing the Tithe. We're standing up to the Imperium. In some quarters, fear grips hearts. Loyal Imperial citizens can't believe their leaders would invite Terra's wrath. In other quarters, seditious joy sparks. Factory workers who've lost sons and daughters to the Guard Tithe quietly cheer in their dormitories, sensing that maybe their sacrifices will finally stop. The chief confessor of the planet issues a conflicted statement, urging citizens to remain calm and continue to worship the Emperor, carefully avoiding outright condemnation or support of Solari's decision. He's trying to straddle a very dangerous line. Inevitably, pockets of dissent form. Not everyone agrees with the governor's path. One senior PDF colonel attempts to lead a portion of the army in a move to arrest Solari and hand him over to the Imperial Tithe officer, essentially a loyalist counter-coup. But Commander Travan anticipated this. The colonel and his mutineers are met with force. A firefight erupts in the PDF base courtyard. Loyalist PDF, loyal to the Imperium, that is, shout that Solari is a heretic. Rebel PDF, loyal to Solari's orders, shout back that they are saving the planet. After a brutal skirmish of lasguns and even a few armored vehicles, trading shots across a parade ground, Travaillan's forces crush the dissenters. The colonel's charred corpse is hung on a fence with the sign, "Traitor to the planet," an irony that won't age well when the Imperium arrives. Within 48 hours of the initial refusal, Governor Solari and his inner circle have effectively seized total control of the planet's government, silenced Imperial communications, and purged or cowed most internal opposition. The Adeptus Arbites precinct, a fortress of Imperial law in the Hive's center, is the one major holdout. The Arbites there, about 100 judges and enforcers, barricade themselves and broadcast one final message to any Imperial receiver. Planetary government in state of rebellion, enforcing Lex Imperialis locally, awaiting reinforcement. Then the Arbites shut off external channels and prepare to hold until death. They know they can't take on the whole PDF, but they're duty-bound to resist as long as possible. Solari at first tries negotiation. He sends envoys to the Arbites' fortress, offering them safe passage off-world if they stand down. The Arbites' response is a salvo of warning bolter fire that nearly takes the envoys' heads off. The die is cast in blood now. Reluctantly, Travaillan orders an all-out assault on the Arbites' precinct. It's a nightmare for the attackers. The Arbites are extremely well armed, and their courthouse is built to withstand exactly this scenario. Battles rage in the hive streets around the precinct for days. Eventually, sheer weight of PDF numbers, plus some heavy equipment, they roll up a tank company and blast the precinct walls. Bring it down. The surviving Arbites, out of ammo, make a last stand in the burning ruin of their stronghold's entrance hall. They fight until every one of them lies dead beneath the statue of the Emperor that dominated the lobby. Ironically, the statue is one of the few things left standing amid the rubble and bodies when the smoke clears. The image of that shattered courthouse with the Emperor's statue still upright will become famous later, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. During that siege, Arbitrator Provost Marok, the commander of the courthouse, rallies his judges with a final Vox address. "Brothers, sisters, we stand alone, but we stand for the Emperor. Let them come. We shall show these traitors the meaning of justice." His voice is resolute, masking the despair he feels. In the corridors, the Arbites lay overlapping fields of fire and booby traps. When PDF troopers breach a side entrance, they're met with shotgun blasts at point-blank range and choke on chlorine gas released from cracked purification vents. Maruk himself, clad in carapace armor etched with the Lex Imperialis, leads a countercharge to push back one assault. His shock maul crackles as he crushes a rebel sergeant's skull, even as last bolts stitch across Marek's thigh. Bleeding and limping, he refuses to yield. It takes a direct hit from a PDF grenade to finally bring him down, and even then, coughing blood, vision fading, Maruk triggers one last trap, blowing the floor charges that send dozens of attackers plummeting into the lower archives with him. The Arbites fight to their very last breath, asking no quarter and giving none. So, now the planet is fully in rebel hands. It's taken perhaps a week from refusal to this point. Governor Solari hasn't declared independence or renounced the Emperor exactly. He's trying to maintain that gray zone of saying, "We just refused an unworkable order." But from the Imperium's perspective, the lines are clear. A fleet will be coming. Solari knows this. He and his advisors work feverishly to fortify. Factorums switch from normal production to churning out weapons and munitions day and night. PDF tech priests bolster the void shields around the Hive City. The system defense ships, a half-functional destroyer and a few intra-system patrol boats, are called home to prepare to fight. Trevon drills his troops and reassigns units to guard key sites, spaceports, orbital defense lasers, Hive generatoria. Propaganda is rolled out across all Vox channels. They can't keep everything secret from the people, so they decide to own it. Vox speakers in every hab and market blare Solari's voice. "People of our world, we stand at a crossroads. We have loved the Emperor and served him for generations, but his distant servants would bleed us dry. For our own survival, we must take a stand. I assure you, this is not heresy, it is preservation. We will continue to honor the Emperor's spirit, but we must govern ourselves or perish. I ask you all to remain calm, support our planetary defense forces, and trust that we do this for you, for all of us who call this world home." Some citizens are inspired by this speech. Others are horrified, hearing only veiled heresy. Civil order phrase, but the PDF and local enforcers clamp down hard on open dissent. A few civilian protests are quashed. Rebel riot troops dispersing crowds with shock batons and shotgun fire. Ironically, not so different from how they'd enforce Imperial law, except now it's in service of the new regime. Meanwhile, out in the void, the Imperium indeed has noticed. Although Solari's men stopped the astropaths on planet, the Tithe Fleet's crew managed a partial astropathic distress call before being detained. Fragmentary though it was, it reached a relay station and eventually Segmentum Command. Keywords like rebellion, the planet's name, tithe refusal were pieced together by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. The response is set in motion. A nearby Imperial Navy battle group, already mobilizing for war against an Orc incursion, is redirected. An astropathic message goes to a certain Space Marine chapter in the vicinity, the Iron Talons, to see if they can contribute a strike force for a quick decapitation strike. And an Inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus named Verena Arctus, traveling with that Navy fleet, takes personal interest. She was en route to investigate cult activity on another world when this rebellion popped up on her slate. Heresy at home, I can hardly ignore that, she mutters, and begins planning accordingly. Back on our rebellious world, a few anxious months pass with no immediate Imperial retaliation. Governor Solari prays, truly prays, in the planet's grand cathedral, that maybe the Imperium will let them be if they see reason. Perhaps he hopes the Administratum will realize the tithe was too high and negotiate or delay. But with each day that hope wanes a little more. The planet is in an anxious limbo, cut off from the usual flow of commerce. No Imperial merchant shipping will approach for fear of being caught in a war zone. Some off-world traders actually do approach the system, sly rogue traders offering to sell Solari black market weapons or offload surplus food in exchange for promethium or precious minerals. Solari makes a few deals to bolster his arsenal. One rogue trader brings a shipment of old Imperial Army pattern las guns and even a couple of surplus Hydra flak tanks. These will prove handy when the invasion comes. The irony of the situation, a renegade free trader helping rebels fight the Imperium for profit. About 6 standard months after the initial rebellion, the hammer falls. Without much warning, multiple vessels translate from warp at the edge of the system. Their Imperial Navy, a battleship, 2 cruisers, several escort frigates. Alongside them, as a vanguard, arrives the strike cruiser of the Iron Talons Space Marines. The moment these ships appear on the planet's long-range augurs, all pretenses end. The Imperium has arrived to collect its due in blood. Panic sweeps through some of the rebel command staff. Solari himself feels a bead of cold sweat run down his temple as the red blips of warships fill the hololithic table in his command center. Yet, he steels himself. We expected this. Now we must weather it, he says aloud, rallying his officers. Commander Trevon straightens his back and starts barking deployment orders. All anti-orbit missiles to ready status. Void shields to maximum output. Fighter squadrons to launch. Above, the Navy fleet establishes orbit with professional swiftness. The rebels' few system ships bravely, or foolishly, rush out to meet them. A corvette and a retrofitted freighter with macro cannons. The Imperial Navy's response is practically a footnote. A light cruiser and 2 destroyers move ahead, and in a brief exchange of ordnance, the rebel corvette is reduced to an expanding cloud of scrap, while the freighter, engines damaged, limps back toward the planet. The Navy does not pursue. There's no need. Instead, they form a blockade perimeter around the world. Admiral Hale, commanding the fleet, sends his own message down to the world, an open vox on all channels. It is Inquisitor Arctus, however, who speaks. Her voice, amplified by the fleet's voxcasters, booms over the world's communications. People of this world, by authority of the immortal Emperor and his Holy Inquisition, I declare your planet to be in a state of treasonous rebellion. Governor Solari and all those who have aided this heresy are hereby judged guilty of sedition. Loyal citizens, if any of you remain, know that the Emperor's justice is at hand. To those who have turned from his light, there is nowhere in the galaxy you can hide. Your only chance, and it is a slim one, is immediate and unconditional surrender. Lay down your arms, deliver your governor and his conspirators bound for execution, and perhaps your population shall be spared utter destruction. If you refuse, prepare to face the Emperor's wrath." Governor Solari listens to this ultimatum from his command bunker deep in the hive spire. The color drains from his face. He had expected a Navy officer to negotiate, perhaps even someone he could reason with. But an Inquisitor? That's a whole different level of doom. His advisory council in the bunker looks to him for guidance. Surrender? Try to bargain? Or resist? Trevan pounds a gauntleted fist on the table. "We fight as we planned. We cannot trust any promise from an Inquisitor. She'll execute us all anyway. Better to sell our lives dearly." Others nod grimly. Solari's mind swims. He realizes his dream of being understood is gone. Now it's about survival, or at least going down fighting. With a heavy heart, he agrees. They will resist to the end. The planet's refusal to surrender is answered almost immediately. High above, Admiral Hale gives the order, and the orbital bombardment intensifies. The Navy targets key anti-orbital defenses first. The giant defense laser silos perched on mountain ranges around the primary hive. Golden lances of energy stab down from the heavens. One by one, those silos erupt in fireballs, visible for hundreds of kilometers. The rebels manage to get a few shots off. A defense laser grazes an Imperial cruiser's void shields. Another nearly hits the Iron Talon strike cruiser, which nimbly evades. But it's not enough. Within an hour, the planet's orbital defense grid is shattered. Now the Navy plays surgeon. Precise strikes on communications hubs, power grids, and PDF garrisons outside the major cities. Solari's command bunker trembles as a macro cannon shell from orbit obliterates the main PDF headquarters complex 5 kilometers away. Thousands of his best soldiers are vaporized in an instant. He grits his teeth. Those were men he considered friends. Now they are martyrs to his cause, he tells himself. Inquisitor Arctis, observing from the Navy flagship's bridge, is somewhat disappointed. This is going easier than she hoped. A part of her was itching to unleash full Exterminatus authority if significant resistance was met. She's a hardliner, that one. Still, she knows the planet has a population in the billions and plenty of potential for ugly surprises, so she restrains herself from overly eager destruction, for now. At last, the orbital barrage relents. Under its cover, dropships and landing craft by the dozens begin their descent. The Iron Talon's strike cruiser unleashes its drop pods first, dozens of them screaming through the atmosphere like vengeful meteors. They slam into Hive Solari Primos, the capital, in and around the governor's spire and other key installations. Each drop pod's doors explode open, and power-armored space marines emerge into the smoke and dust of their impact. The Iron Talons are known for ruthless efficiency. Captain Daedon leads this strike. His orders capture the governor alive if possible. The Inquisitor wants a public execution, and neutralize any anti-air defenses so the guard landings can proceed unimpeded. The Space Marines encounter stiff resistance in the upper levels of the hive, but it's hopeless for the rebels. In the grand corridors of the spire, squads of elite PDF bodyguards attempt to hold choke points against the incoming Astartes. They might as well try to hold back the ocean with a broom. Bolter fire chews through their flak armor like paper. Frag grenades roll into their defensive positions and blow limbs and bodies apart. A few brave or crazed PDF troopers charge the invaders with bayonets or knives, but a ceramite-clad giant swats them aside effortlessly. Despite suffering a few minor wounds, one Marine is injured by a lucky plasma pistol shot. The Iron Talons carve their way towards Solari's throne room. Captain Daedon himself, in the massive Terminator armor of the First Company, storms the final gate of the governor's palace. Rebel heavy stubbers deployed there open up, the cacophony echoing down marble halls. but Daedon just keeps advancing, the heavy rounds sparking off his thick armor. He and his honor guard respond with storm bolters, mowing down the barricaded PDF in seconds. Within minutes, the entrance is taken. The Astartes suffer maybe a few scratches, while dozens of defenders lie dead or dying. Governor Solari's last line of defense is the palace's own household guard, a few hundred loyal men in carapace armor, many of whom grew up with Solari or served him for decades. They set up a desperate last stand in the throne room's antechamber. Solari, trembling yet resolved, refuses their pleas to escape via a secret shuttle. "No, if I flee now, I damn everyone. I will face whatever comes," he says. Though in truth no escape is truly possible. The sky is filled with Imperial landing craft and darting Navy fighters. The household guard fires volleys as the Space Marines breach the ornate doors. A storm of las and plasma fire from the rebels manages to strike one Marine in a vulnerable joint of his power armor, felling him. A minor victory. Then the Iron Talons retaliate. Bolters bark. A flamer whooshes jets of promethium. The room becomes an abattoir. Those guards not cut down fight almost to the last man hand to hand. One even manages to stab a Marine through a gap in his greave with a monomolecular blade before being crushed by an armored fist. But within minutes, it's over. Captain Daedon steps over the corpse of Solari's chief bodyguard and finds the governor cowering by his throne. Interestingly, Solari doesn't beg or try to flee. Knowing the end is nigh, he draws himself up and faces the giant Astartes. "I did what I had to, for my people," he says quietly. Daedon tilts his helmeted head, perhaps feeling a twinge of respect for the man's composure. Then, with a single swing of his massive gauntlet, he backhands Solari into unconsciousness. The Space Marines bind the governor's limp form and drag him away. He will live to stand judgment for now. Elsewhere on the planet, the war is still raging full force. The initial orbital strikes and the Marine spearhead decapitated much of the rebel command and eliminated key defenses. But millions of PDF soldiers remain in the field, willing to fight on. Imperial Guard regiments make planetfall now in waves. The largest landings occur on the outskirts of the capital hive and around a secondary hive on another continent. The rebels still have armored divisions and aircraft. In fact, as the Cadian 232nd and the Arcadian 5th Armored roll out of their dropships onto the ash plains outside Hive Primus, they meet stiff resistance. Rebel Laman Russ tanks, the PDF had a small arsenal of aging armored vehicles, trade fire with Loyalist guard tanks. The plain becomes a deadly duel of iron and fire. The rebels know the terrain and had pre-sighted kill zones. They destroyed dozens of Imperial Chimera transports in ambushes, and for a short time it looks like the invasion at that spot might bog down. But then overhead roars a squadron of Imperial Navy Marauder bombers, redirected from orbit. They carpet bomb the rebel tank lines. Explosions march across the gray landscape, flipping tanks, burying soldiers in trenches alive. Imperial armor pushes through the newly made gaps. Within hours, the outskirts of the hive are encircled. The secondary hive's battle is even more ferocious. There, rebel PDF hold the towering hive Secundus in force. And they didn't have Space Marines hit them first, so their defense is more coordinated. As the Mordian Iron Guard regiments assault Hive Secundus, they find every approach a meat grinder. Rebel heavy weapons nests in hab-block towers, rain missiles and Lascanon beams on the advancing Imperial platoons. The Mordians, disciplined and grim, march line abreast under their officers' whistles, returning fire volley by volley. Casualties are appalling on both sides. Entire city blocks burn. Bodies clog sewer outlets. The air is thick with ash and the tang of ozone from constant las fire. The approach to the hive is a colossal highway lined with statues of past Imperial heroes, perfect cover for ambushes. Rebel PDF units have entrenched behind makeshift barricades of sandbags and collapsed HAB vehicles, with overlapping fields of fire covering the main thoroughfares. As the Mordians advance in impeccable ranks, their blue greatcoats vivid even under the smoky sky, they are met with withering fire. Autocannon rounds from a fortified HAB block punch through the front rank of guardsmen, spraying gore across the pavement. The Mordians step over their fallen comrades and return disciplined volleys at the muzzle flashes in the windows. A rebel heavy bolter nest, camouflaged behind a toppled Akala statue, opens up. 3 round bursts scythe down half a platoon before a Mordian missile team pivots and sends a rocket screaming into that position, blowing the gunner and his crew apart in a fireball. Street by street, the Mordians methodically push forward, but every meter is paid for in blood. Snipers pick off officers whenever they can identify them. The rebels quickly learn to target the ones shouting orders or carrying the banner. One Mordian lieutenant loses half his face to a sniper's last shot, but refuses evacuation, simply tying a rag over the wound and pressing on with pistol in hand. For the rebels in Hive Secundus, this is their turf. They know every alley and escape route. They pop out of sewer grates behind Imperial squads to lob grenades, then disappear into maintenance shafts to set up the next ambush. The Iron Guard, unflappable, adjust by deploying flamethrower teams at every junction. Now, when a rebel cell tries a sneak attack, they often find themselves greeted by a sudden blast of jellied promethium that turns their hiding place into an inferno. The screams of burning insurgents echo through underhive tunnels. Slowly but surely, the Imperial forces advance block by block, leaving behind a trail of spent shells and burning ruins. It's here, in Hive Secundus, that the conflict takes a bizarre turn. Remember that cult Inquisitor Arctis had been originally headed to investigate? It turns out her instincts were correct. A chaos cult had taken root in the underhive of Secundus long before the rebellion, festering among despairing manufactorum workers. The upheaval of the rebellion is exactly what they were waiting for. As the Loyalist Guard forces and rebel PDFs slug it out above, these heretics decide to make their move. Enacting profane rites in the depths of the hive's sump, they manage to tear open a small warp rift in the bowels of the city. Suddenly, amidst the street fighting up top, a new horror emerges, gibbering lesser demons of Khorne, scarlet-skinned, horned, and slavering, spilling up from sewers and maintenance shafts, attacking anyone they find, loyalist or rebel, doesn't matter to them. The battle for Hive Secundus turns into a 3-way slaughterhouse. Rebel soldiers, thinking the Imperials somehow unleashed demons as a terror weapon, start to panic or accuse prisoners of witchcraft. Imperial guardsmen, knowing these things must be chaos-spawned, grit their teeth and fight the demons even as they push toward rebel positions. Inquisitor Arctis catches the psychic stink of the warp breach and immediately diverts her personal retinue and an accompanying Grey Knight's squad. She anticipated such a possibility and had requested a team of these elite demon hunters. The Grey Knights drop into the lower levels of Secundus like silver comets. In brutal close combat amid flickering lumen globes and steaming pipes, they hack apart the knot of cultists and slowly force the warp rift closed with sanctified force and psychic might. It's not an easy fight. 2 Grey Knights fall to a hulking bloodletter demon before it's banished, but ultimately they contain the outbreak. Arctis, observing the carnage, doesn't hesitate now. She issues an order of Exterminatus on Hive Secundus, a controlled, limited one, as contradictory as that sounds. Specifically, she commands Admiral Hale to lance strike the lower hive to purge any remaining demonic taint. Hale obliges. From orbit, precise lance beams spear down once more, but this time they're aimed into the gaping wounds of the lower city. Entire sublevels of the hive vaporize in searing white fire, collapsing parts of the structure. Thousands of rebels and, unfortunately, some Imperial troops caught in those lower levels are incinerated along with any lingering demons. The hive city, though not completely destroyed, is effectively cleaved at its base. The upper spires tilt and sag but remain partially intact. This horrifying display breaks the rebel defense of Secundus, cut off literally from the ground and witnessing what looks to them like the wrath of God. They don't know the specifics, only that shafts of light from the heavens obliterated half the city. The remaining PDF there lose heart. Many throw down arms. Many more flee into the ash wastes or surrender to the first Imperial patrols they find. Within 72 hours of the Imperial invasion beginning, organized rebel resistance is effectively over. Hive Primus is secured, its governor captured, its defenses infiltrated by Marines, and then flooded with guard units who methodically clear building after building. Hive Secundus is effectively neutralized by Exterminatus light and ground assault. Smaller settlements and mining outposts see short firefights as pockets of PDF either give up or get swiftly overwhelmed by superior Imperial force. The casualty list is immense. The planet's surface in many places is scorched and pockmarked with craters and mass graves. Millions of civilians who couldn't hide well enough were killed in crossfire or bombardments. Entire hab blocks are collapsed. In the main hive, fires rage uncontrolled for days after, turning the sky above into a black haze. Inquisitor Arctis wastes no time rounding up what's left of the rebel leadership. Governor Solari is hauled before her in the ruined Grand Plaza of Hive Primus, which now serves as an open-air tribunal arena. He's battered, bruised, but conscious. To her slight surprise, he doesn't plead for mercy or recant his actions. In fact, as she pronounces him guilty of heresy and sentences him to death, he speaks out, voice hoarse but clear, so that nearby survivors and an audio recorder servitor can hear. I only ever wanted to save my people. If that be heresy, I go to my grave with a clear conscience that I tried to spare them from your cruelty. Arctis gives a thin, hard smile and responds, Your misguidance spared nothing. Look around you. This is the result of your defiance. Solari does look. The shattered buildings, the piles of corpses being gathered by labor gangs under Imperial gunpoint. A tear actually rolls down his cheek. Perhaps he realizes she's right. His choice led here. Or perhaps he just mourns how it ended. Either way, the Inquisitor is unmoved. With a nod, she signals Captain Dayden. The Space Marine draws his bolt pistol and, without ceremony, puts a round through Solari's skull. Thus ends the Governor's life. In the following weeks, the Imperial forces secure every inch of the planet. Inquisitor Arctis's agents and the Victorious Guard conduct sweeps for any remaining rebel officers or collaborators. Hundreds are identified and executed on the spot. The chief confessor, who tried to stay neutral, is found weeping in his cathedral. Arctis deems him unreliable and has him shipped off-world in chains to be tried for negligence. Commander Trevan, the firebrand PDF leader, actually survived the war up to that point. He'd been leading a guerrilla holdout in the Underhive ruins. Once Solari was dead, Trevan attempted to continue fighting, but Grey Knights flushed his cell out. Trevan died gun in hand, cut in half by a storm bolter burst. His corpse was dragged to the surface and hung on a post as a symbolic execution after the fact. All rebel propaganda is torn down and replaced with Imperial edicts. The populace, what's left of it, is gathered in mass atonement ceremonies led by newly arrived ecclesiarchy priests who accompany the fleet. Many of these people are disoriented, grieving, and terrified. They don't even resist when the priest commands them to their knees to beg the Emperor's forgiveness. In truth, many are begging, not just to the Emperor, but to the Imperials around them, to spare their lives. Inquisitor Arctis has a difficult choice. The planet is ravaged, but still potentially useful. She could recommend Exterminatus to make a pure example, but that would be wasteful. And the main objectives, punish rebels, retrieve the tithe in blood, are achieved. Instead, she tasks Admiral Hale with staying in orbit a few months longer to enforce order, and sends requests for Administratum and Mechanicus teams to come begin reconstruction and resource assessment. The post-war casualty reports indicate perhaps 1/5 of the planet's population died in the short rebellion and its suppression. Another 1/5 are injured or maimed. The rest, well, they're now very chastened Imperial subjects once again. Before departing, Inquisitor Arctis and Captain Daedon organize one final spectacle. In the same plaza where Solari was executed, they erect makeshift gallows and chopping blocks. Over 100 rebel officials, those who survived capture, are executed in a single day of blood and fanfare. Some are hanged, some beheaded. Some, the worst heretics like the discovered Chaos cult leaders, are burned alive or rendered into bubbling slime by promethium sprayed from flamers. The gathered citizens are forced to watch as their former leaders are systematically obliterated. Any lingering sympathy is drowned in the horror of it. For the Imperium, this is a necessary coda to the rebellion, establishing beyond doubt who's in charge and what happens to traitors. The shattered world remains under martial law for years afterward. The Imperium renames it. Though it once bore Solari's family name, all official records now simply designate it with a stern new title, something like Penitent Primus, or an alphanumeric code. A new governor, imported from off-world, of course, arrives with a full regiment of fresh troops as permanent garrison. They rebuild the hive infrastructure enough to resume mining and manufacturing. The surviving citizens toil extra shifts to meet not only normal tithes, but additional reparation tithes imposed to pay for the resources expended during their pacification. In the years to come, the planet slowly rebuilds under the Imperium's stern gaze. The scars of war remain. Entire districts of the capital hive are cordoned off due to lingering radiation or unstable rubble. But new manufactorum lines open up amid the ruins, and the surviving populace is taxed and tithed harder than ever to make up for lost output. Each week, mandatory prayer sessions are held in the reforged central cathedral, where the new ecclesiarchy priests ensure everyone loudly proclaims their renewed loyalty. The local news-picked feeds, now controlled by an Imperial censure board, broadcast heroic tales of the Imperial Guard regiments who liberated the world and denounced the former administration as vile heretics who led everyone astray. Over time, many of the ordinary citizens, worn down by toil and constant propaganda, internalize the narrative. It becomes common to hear even those who once muttered dissent saying things like, "We're grateful the Emperor took us back." Public memory reshapes itself. The dead rebels are not martyrs to reminisce about. They're criminals to be forgotten. In this way, the Imperium doesn't just defeat the rebellion in body, but in spirit. By the next generation, the very idea of defying the Emperor is virtually unthinkable among the populace. Fear and indoctrination have done their work. Thus ends the saga of a single world that dared to say no. Its cities lie in ruins, its soil soaked with the blood of its people and their conquerors. But the Imperium of Man stands intact and unyielding. The world itself. It will be allowed to limp onward, rebuilt under watchful eyes, serving once more as a cog in the great Imperial machine, admonished, humbled, and forever fearful of the Emperor's wrath that nearly wiped it from the stars. This hypothetical saga we've traced isn't unique. Countless systems throughout history have flirted with the same folly and met similar fates. It always ends in ruins and repentance, if anyone is left to repent. For every planet like our example, there are hundreds more that never dare raise the banner of revolt, and perhaps that is the true goal of the Imperial response. The charred remains of one defiant world serve to keep 100 others in line. Fear is the Emperor's greatest weapon, and its echo reverberates from each punished world to 10,000 others. So what ultimately happens when an Imperial world rejects the Emperor? Nothing good, and usually nothing left. A planet's defiance is answered with overwhelming, brutal certainty. Its cities burn, its leaders are slain, and its population is either brought to heel in chains or consigned to oblivion. In the end, the rebellion is not just crushed, it is erased, made into a morbid lesson for other worlds. The Emperor's will is reasserted at any cost. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only one fate for those who say no to the God Emperor. Sooner or later, utter destruction, as sure as night follows day. In the Imperium of Man, betrayal isn't just a crime, it's a death sentence, for planets as much as for people.